straight up then, the Rajya Sabha today has given a thumbs up, a go-ahead to the government's Fugitive Economic Offenders Bill. In fact, the new law will prevent the likes of Nirav Modi, Mehul Choksi, Vijay Mallya and Jatin Mehta from fleeing the country and evading the law of the land after committing economic frauds. This has been, something that the government was pushing for a very long time, and finally in the monsoon session we've seen how the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha have given it a go-ahead. It will now become a law. What will it essentially do is to empower the investigative agencies to be able to confiscate the properties both in India and overseas. It will be a huge shot in the arm for the banking sector. Remember, the banking sector is suffering massively on account of the non-performing assets, and most of these, in all these cases, we have seen how huge money has been taken by these. These people, and then they've flown out of the country. They're evading the law of the land. They're evading the banks and not, in fact, paying the banks back. So this has been a huge shot in the arm for the banking sector. However, we've been talking to a lot of experts, and they believe that, while it is easier for a lot of enforcement agencies and investigative agencies to get to seize the properties in India, as far as the overseas properties are concerned, because an overseas law or the law of that particular country will kick in, it will be difficult for the authorities to make sure and to ensure that those assets are also seized. And that is why the diplomacy in terms of what the country is doing and also investigating agencies, the kind of proof that they have, will be very important. In fact, before we move forward, let's hear out from Piyush Goyal. He was addressing the parliamentarians just a while ago on that crucial bill. Let's hear him out.
जो लोग अपने देश के कानून को सबमिट नहीं करते हैं, कानून की व्यवस्था के सामने अपने आप को पेश नहीं करते हैं, ऐसे लोगों के ऊपर सख्त से सख्त कार्रवाई होनी चाहिए और सभी देश मिलके एक दूसरे का सहयोग करें इन लोगों के ऊपर कार्रवाई सख्त करने के लिए। तो मैं समझता हूं कि जितने विषय आए थे उन सबको एक कोशिश की है कि आपके समक्ष रखूं। फिर भी अगर किसी माननीय सदस्य को कोई विषय हो तो बाद में भी मैं मिलके चर्चा करके उसका समाधान कर सकता हूं। मैं आप सबसे अनुरोध करूंगा कि आप इस बिल को पारित करके सरकार के कदमों को, जिससे हम इस प्रकार के भगोड़ों को तो सख्त से सख्त सजा देना चाहते हैं, उसमें आप मदद करें।
All right, to talk about more on that landmark bill, let me take it across to Rajendra Chitale, who's joining us on the phone line. He's the managing partner of Chitale and Company. Mr. Chitale, many thanks for taking your time out and speaking to us at ET now. This is a huge, shot in the arm for the banking sector. The Parliament has approved the Fugitive Economic Offenders Bill. The bill will ensure that in cases where the total value is over 100 crore rupees or more, that will come into the purview of this bill. In terms of how easy or difficult will now it be for the banking system to be able to recover their monies from these fugitive economic offenders?
Well, I think we need to first differentiate between the consequences which will forthcome under this law versus the position of banks. Banks are not the ones who would eventually get access to the property which is attached under the Act. The property which would get attached under the Act by the special court would effectively be vested with the government of India and not the banks. So, in fact, the situation would be that unless the government uses these funds to actually capitalize the banks, in effect, the property attached would not result in direct recovery for the banks at all. So I think we need to differentiate between the consequence of this law and the position of banks vis-a-vis that consequence.
That's a very important point that you've raised, that this will not help the banks in getting direct recovery in a lot of these cases. For example, in Vijay Mallya's case, how he owes about 9,000 crore rupees to the banking system. What you're essentially saying is that even though the Fugitive Economic Offenders Bill has come into place, this will not yield the banking system their entire money that they've lent. So in terms of, while direct recovery will not happen, it does really help the investigative agencies to be able to seize the assets, then dispose these assets. So what is the timeline that, the banks should really look at in terms of getting their monies back?
Well, as I mentioned, I think the banks getting their money back is a function of the security that they hold and the realization of that security which is in their hands. As Richie, you're aware, there are securities of some of these people that you refer to, which are already there with the banks. Banks have tried to sell some of these assets. There have been auctions held and so on and so forth. So that is a process banks will have to follow. Banks will, the property which gets attached, subject to whatever legal contest which happens under this law, is not the one which will vest in the banks or be available to the banks for recovery.
All right. Sir, I was also talking to Mr. Ranina just before we dialed into you, and he was saying that recovering the money from foreign assets is going to be a concern because this really depends on the law of the land of that particular company. What is your own sense of recovering the money from the foreign assets, while it does give access to the enforcement agencies to seize the foreign assets as well? But this is going to be a tall order. This is going to be a tough task. Do you also believe so?
Because this would be an order of an Indian court which could be subject to legal challenge in India itself. Besides that, when it goes to a foreign country, each country has its own laws, and it is for the courts in that countries to determine the enforceability or otherwise of an order passed by the court of another country. And that is what would in effect happen. So obviously, trying to access or confiscate properties which are in other countries is something which only time will tell how it pans out.
Absolutely. Mr. Chitale, many thanks for taking your time out and speaking to us. That's a big story that we are tracking here on India Now, how the Parliament has given the Fugitive Economic Offenders Bill a go-ahead. But as we've been talking to a lot of experts, it is going to be difficult to be able to firstly get access for banks to all the money that these economic offenders had lent from them in the first place, and also whether they will be able to recover the money, especially that has been parked abroad, parked overseas in various assets. Will those agencies and will the other countries really allow the enforcement agencies to be able to seize the assets abroad as well? So those two are, of course, the important issues that have been raised by several experts.